One of the things about this class is that the study builds. There are certain things that probably won't be clearly understood unless you were here for the early classes. And so if you're joining us tonight or you're joining us later online, you probably need to go back and get the early classes as well, because there's a basis from which we're operating that you need to know about. I remember when one of my boys had his first recognition of a girl, at least the first one that I became aware of. And so we began talking about it a little bit, and he talked about liking this girl at school. And I said, well, what is it that you liked about this girl? And I fully expected him to say, well, I think she's cute, or, she's smart or something like that. And he said, she's fast. He was impressed by how fast she was. And so I say that to say there are a lot of things that may attract us to one another. But whatever it is that attracts us, when those loving feelings that feel like they must be love, when we begin to experience them, those fluttering feelings are exciting. And they're hard to dismiss. In fact, oftentimes parents who are trying to be protective of their children will not be able to get through to their children. Their children will think, my parents just don't understand. This is the real thing. This is love. I feel it. And as we're going to talk about in one of the later lessons, it may not, in fact, be love. It may be something that feels a lot like it, but isn't, in fact, it. So what we're going to be talking about is how love blossoms tonight. And we're going to see that in the Song of Songs tonight. But I want to begin with this question. Whether we're talking about building relationships for the first time or after a death, as Jim and Jency have experienced through widowhood, or divorce, dating is awkward for most of us. Then comes the defining the relationship talks, where the future of the relationship is discussed. What makes dating a pain, and what can make it fun? I am interested in hearing what your perspective is on that. What makes dating a pain? Or you can go the other way. What can make it fun?
I think dating is hard for most people because becoming vulnerable before someone else is just really hard to do. We want to, appear a certain way, and it's just hard to get to know somebody on that intimate of a level. But Trent did a really good job of this whenever we were dating, and he made it fun, as he usually does with things, makes them fun. And he asked me a question of the day every day. So it kind of like set the expectation that we were going to learn something about each other. And I always got to, wonder what the question was going to be. And I felt kind of like he was searching me. So it made it fun and kind of helped that awkwardness a little bit in the beginning.
Yeah, what I love about that is the intentionality of getting to know one another more deeply than just, playing it off the cuff and doing whatever comes. You're so right, Andrea. We're vulnerable in those moments, and for that reason, I mean, all of us want to be liked, and so the temptation is to be a little artificial. The temptation is to simply present the best of who we are, and maybe not be completely honest with who we are. And a lot of people are really good, and it's not even done maliciously. at acting for some time. So it's hard to be unnatural. That's one of the things that makes, I think, dating hard, is you feel sometimes unnatural. Someone else.
Dale, the first time that Jim and I went out, we went first, and by the time I got dressed and got there, I was so sick in my stomach that, I hadn't dated in like 50 years. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And we did fine, but I just told him I'm just sick in my stomach.
Yeah. I think it may be, I think those of us who are younger than you are, Jency, may look and say, if you're older, or you've already done this, it's not a problem. Well, it doesn't matter how old or young you are, it still can be very awkward and hard.
Yes.
Yeah. I remember in college, guys hating what we had at college called, they hated Sadie Hawkins weekend. Now, for those of you who don't know, Sadie Hawkins weekend is when girls ask the guys out. That was a weekend that I always felt great empathy for girls. And the reason was, you were concerned, would I get asked out in the first place, And the second thing was, what if I get asked out by someone that I really don't want to go with? How do I handle that in a graceful way? So that made me very empathetic toward girls who are usually on the receiving end of those invitations. And for a guy whose dating advice amounted to this, okay, get ready. Okay, you may want to write this down. This is deep stuff. I asked my brother, who's 11 years older than me, for dating advice. Here was his dating advice to me. Be late. Okay? That's the extent of my dating preparation, which is not really adequate preparation. Let me say that. And so going into that, there's a fear of rejection. There's a fear of how to end this relation gracefully if I feel like I need to do that. But here's the deal, and this is leading us into the Song of Songs tonight. If the relationship is built on friendship, without the pressure of what younger people call talking, or the physicality that sometimes accompanies relationships today, if it doesn't have that kind of pressure, it can develop much more naturally. So what we see in Beloved and Lover is that they have a relationship that is built on friendship that is now blossoming into love. And it becomes a beautiful thing, a more natural thing than a lot of us sometimes experience. And there's my beautiful bride who has joined us in our class tonight. We're not together. She's with grandchildren right now, but joining us. So maybe she'll have some input as we go. So let's jump into chapter 2. Somebody read Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verses 1 and 2.
I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. As a lily among brambles, so is my love among the young women.
All right. Now, you'll remember last week, how did Beloved, or how did Beloved feel about her appearance? Who remembers?
She didn't like it.
Why?
She was embarrassed because she was dark and tan.
Right. Which suggested again that she was an outdoor girl. She had to work in life. She was not pampered. She was not protected in the indoors, which was valued in that time. fair skin, smooth skin. She had dark tan skin that was, had done some work. And so she was kind of embarrassed by her appearance. Well, lilies and roses are rare in the Middle East. So what is being said here, both by beloved to start with and by lover? When they use that imagery of lilies and roses, what's being said?
She sees herself as a beautiful flower.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to that in a minute. Last week, or in chapter 1, she did not see herself that way. Something's changed. And we're going to talk about what has changed in the way that she sees herself. But he is saying of her that she's beautiful. He compares her to these beautiful flowers. And I don't probably have to tell you women this, but I'm going to say it. I'm going to say the obvious. We men were created very visually. We're much more visual than women are, which creates potential struggles with things like pornography or lust. Okay, and so we are attracted to beauty. Women, and I try to remind young brides to be of this. You may be self-conscious about your body, but he is enthusiastic to see you. I told Laurie I was going to say this, so you all don't write me any mean letters, okay? Thinking that I've embarrassed her. But I remember on our wedding night, Laurie being very self-conscious about what she wore and about the lights, or I wanted lights on. She wanted lights off. And it all had to do with me being visual and her being not completely comfortable with her body. But yet, lover says of beloved that she is a rare beauty. Even she seems to believe it now, but she doubted it in chapter 1. So let me just ask this. This is kind of a little bit of a tangent, not much of one. Women, I want to hear from you. What does it mean to you to hear that kind of affirmation from your lover, your husband?
I think, for me, I don't like to look in the mirror a lot, or I try not to do it. It's just, I think women in general just, I don't even know if it's self-conscious or if I just don't want to focus on it because I just, I don't see anything necessarily special about it. But when Trent talks to me about the way that I look, it makes me feel special. It makes me feel set apart, like he's taken notice of me, and he does it over and over again, like not just whenever we started dating, but that he continually notices me, and it really makes me feel good. It's something that I don't ever want to stop. So
Yeah, it's very affirming. And I don't want you all to not know this. I haven't been very good at that. And Laurie will sometimes hurtfully tell you that. That just wasn't something that was part of the environment that I grew up in. And so that's been hard for me to do that. But what we're learning from the Song of Songs is that for a woman, that's very meaningful. Any of you other women want to give some input?
I would just say that, the society that we're in, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I had trouble with my sound earlier today. Just in the society we live in, there's just so much pressure on women already to look a certain way, to be a certain way. And so to hear from the one that we want to hear from, that they're attracted to us still, even after birthing babies, that there's still an attraction to us means everything. And to know there's a desire there, I think that's part of what's kind of going on here. Not seductive in an ugly way, but it's that desire. I desire you. I long for you. I want to be with you. You are special to me. Those are very important words to hear.
Yeah, they are. And this is just a simple bit of advice, men. One of the things that we're going to talk about later is how different men and women respond sexually. That men, because we are visual, are microwaves. And women, because they need emotional connection, are more like crock pots. All right? And as a result, if you men get up in the morning and you're feeling a little amorous and you're thinking, I would like to be intimate with my wife later on in the day, I would just suggest you begin complimenting her beauty early, okay? And then throughout. Because that prepares her, that enables her to feel that closeness and that connection that will be very meaningful for her. All right? So the importance of affirmation, we're going to come back to that in a minute. Well, let's go to Ephesians 5. Leave Song of Songs 2 for just a moment. And read Ephesians 5:28 or 25 through 28. Somebody read those verses for us, please. Anybody have that?
Yeah, I'll get you.
Okay.
Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself.
Okay. I alluded to this a minute ago. Beloved has changed her view of herself from the insecurities of her dark skin to seeing herself now as a rare beauty. How did it happen? How has she changed her view of herself?
Constantly hearing it from lover.
All right. She has heard his affirmation. She has heard it enough now that she's beginning to believe it. She may not believe that everybody sees her that way, but she believes that love her sees her that way, and that's enough for her. So she is able to see herself that way. Now, when the Song of Songs talks about a wall, it is talking about the protectiveness like you might find at a military base. If you've ever lived around or been around a military base, you know that there are fences up. You know that you have to go through security. It's a very protected area. And so when she talks about being a wall, or the Song of Songs talks about the wall, it is talking about being closed off to sexual advances. And what Paul says in Ephesians is that husbands have a responsibility in the purity of their wives. Did you notice that language? Look again at verse 26. To make her holy, cleansing her. Verse 27, present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. It is important that husbands understand that we have a certain level of responsibility for the purity of our wives, to make them holy and blameless. And the way that we often are able to do that is through affirming love. Women are created, men, with this need to be affirmed in this way. And when they're not by their husband, and then someone comes into their life another male comes into their life who does begin to affirm them that way, she's vulnerable to that kind of attention. He may not have good intentions. And if she's not getting that kind of affirmation from her husband, she may be vulnerable to the advances of this person who is giving her that kind of affirmation. So that's an important piece, I think, in protecting our relationships and protecting our marriages from adultery, for instance. Okay? So let's go to Ezekiel. You may be saying, what are we doing in Ezekiel? Talking about intimacy. Well, I think you'll see in just a minute. Ezekiel chapter 16. For those who are not quite sure where Ezekiel it is, it's a little more than halfway. And in my Bible, it's page 1330. Probably not much good for you, but I'll tell you where it is in my Bible. Somebody read Ezekiel 16, verses 7 through 13.
I made you grow like a plant of the field. You grew and developed and entered puberty. Your breast had formed and your hair had grown, yet you were stark naked. Later I passed by, and when I looked at you and saw that you were old enough for love, I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your naked body. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you, declares the sovereign Lord, and you became mine. I bathed you with water and washed the blood from you and put ointments on you. I clothed you with an embroidered dress and put sandals of fine leather on you. I dressed you in fine linen and covered you with costly garments. I adorned you with jewelry. I put bracelets on your arms and a necklace around your neck. And I put a ring on your nose, earrings on your ears, and a beautiful crown on your head. So you were adorned with gold and silver. Your clothes were of fine linen, and your costly fabric and embroidered cloth. Your food was honey, olive oil, and the finest flour. You became very beautiful and rose to become a queen.
Go ahead and read verse 14 too, Trent.
And your fame spread among the nations on account of your beauty, because the splendor I had given you made your beauty perfect, declares the sovereign Lord.
Who's speaking here?
God,
God's speaking. Who's he talking about?
Israel.
He's talking about Israel in general, but he's really specifically
Jerusalem.
talking about Jerusalem. Now, what do you find interesting about that language, especially in the context of our class?
When I first read that, my thought was just like Jerusalem needs God's protection and his provision, when they were naked, so to speak, they needed him to wash them, protect them. A wife needs her husband to that. And I think, also a wife is vulnerable, to those advances, like you were saying, and then to those insecurities. But the husband can blanket her with protection and affirmations. And then something else I thought of was that covenant love is unconditional, and it's given even though it's not deserved.
That's very good. What's so fascinating to me about this is it's comical in some ways, is that we may have a concept, the world may have a concept that God is this destroyer of fun. He is the party pooper who doesn't want anybody to have any kind of pleasure. The language God is using to describe his affection for Jerusalem is intimate language. This is passionate. It verges on the similar erotic language of the Song of Songs. And God is expressing this for the people of Israel, Jerusalem in particular. Now, that tells us really something, I think, very significant about what we're supposed to learn from our relationships, our intimate relationships. And so God through Ezekiel is telling us both the importance of lavish love and the importance of receiving that love exclusively. There's a key word, exclusively. Because you remember, really, if you read the rest of the context of Ezekiel, Jerusalem gave herself to many lovers. She didn't give herself just to Yahweh. And that broke God's heart. She committed spiritual adultery against God. So we're talking about, when we talk about Song of Songs and we talk about the marriage relationship, we're talking about an exclusive relationship. Although the relationship between beloved and lover had obstacles and threats that they had to overcome, particularly King Solomon, and he'll raise his head again a few more times in the book. But this mimics God's affection for Jerusalem, mimics the kind of affection that's meant to be between a husband and a wife, and the heartbreak that's there when that's not an exclusive relationship. There are dangers, there are threats to the relationship that we need to be attuned to, and that will come up later in the study as well. Any questions or comments? And I want you to ask questions, even if they're not directly on topic. If you have questions about anything as we go through this related to beautiful intimacy, please feel free to ask. All right. Next question. Unfortunately, the human body has been idolized in American culture. But there is a theology of the body in Scripture. You see Romans chapter 12, verse 1, where it talks about presenting our bodies as a living sacrifice. And the second passage should say 1 Corinthians 6:19, not Ephesians 6:19. 1 Corinthians 6:19 says, we were bought with a price, therefore we are to glorify God with our bodies. So there's a theology of the body in Scripture. God created everything beautiful and good. What is beauty? And why are some Christians at times repressive about beauty? What is beauty, and why are Christians sometimes repressive about beauty? Got some thoughts about that?
Dale,
Yeah.
through many years, the most fantastic thing that I've got to go through is being with a lady, a woman that I love, I care for. And that right there is just, to me, the start of it, because you get to enjoy what God's given you. And that says a bunch.
You have enjoyed not only the outer beauty, you have enjoyed the inner beauty as well.
Yes.
Yes.
Dale, I looked up I looked it up, I just looked up the definition. I was trying to think of the word that I was trying to think of to describe beauty, and it's really, it uses the senses. It's a combination of qualities such as shape, color, form, that it pleases the aesthetic senses, especially the sight.
All
It's
right.
something that draws you and makes you want more of it.
Okay. And what's so remarkable about the Song of Songs is that it's very descriptive in that way. A lot of visual, beautiful language. So beauty is something that is pleasing to the eyes, to the senses, and, as Jim pointed out, to the heart. Now, here's also the truth. Beauty can be intimidating. It can create envy. It can create lust. Just like all of God's wonderful gifts, beauty can be made evil when it's misused. And so in some cases, sin has blemished the purity of beauty. Yet the Song of Songs is unashamed in highlighting beauty. The symbolic language, as we're going to see, is highly erotic in its poetry. My guess is, and I don't know this, but I'm speculating that maybe some of the language, maybe some of the symbolic language is meant to present a hidden meaning, perhaps to hide some things from Solomon, about all that may be going on. And so beauty needs appropriate protective boundaries, but within those boundaries, beauty is to be enjoyed, and as we will see in this book, it is to be consumed. And I don't use that word lightly. We're going to see in the Song of Songs a consumption of beauty. The identification of beauty, the affirmation of beauty, and then the consumption of that beauty in sexual ways. And it's a beautiful, wonderful thing in the eyes of God. So one more passage before we get back to the Song of Songs. 2 Samuel, because this will help us understand some things talked about in the Song of Songs. 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 18 and 19. Anybody got that and would read it for us? This is
I got it.
This is King David after he has brought the ark into Jerusalem. And so whoever was about to read, go ahead.
And when David had finished offering the burnt offerings and the peace offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of hosts, and distributed among all the people, the whole multitude of Israel, both men and women, a cake of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisins to each one. Then all the people departed, each to his house.
Okay. The transportation of the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem was a highlight for David. So he does something kind of unusual here. What did you read? What did Josh read that he did for the people? What did he give them?
Gave them a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins.
All right. What were the gifts of raisin cakes about? What's going on here?
I'm not sure if this is right, but some things I read about the raisin cakes is that they're kind of like a fertility boost and like an aphrodisiac type thing. And so it seems like David is blessing, the people, and then they go to their homes, so they feast together.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Andrea. David was excited by the moment, as David was apt to be when holy things were accomplished. So he blessed the people, and he essentially sent them home with this aphrodisiac or sexual stimulant, telling them to be fruitful and multiply and to enjoy life, especially sex. That's essentially what's happening here. All right. He's saying, hey, take a raisin cake with you, go home and have plenty of sex. Okay. Now, in chapter 2 and verse 5, we're going to see beloved speak of a similar mood. So let's turn back again to Song of Songs, and let's read together verses 3 through 7. Somebody read that for us.
Like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my beloved among the young men. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. Let him then lead me to the banquet hall, and let his banner over me be love. Strengthen me with raisins, and refresh me with apples, for I am faint with love. His left arm is under my head, and his right arm embraces me. Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you by the gazelles and by the does of the field, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires.
All right, this is a very sensual description of their physical position. She talks about him being a shade, an apple tree to her. That the reference to the apple is essentially a reference to love. The fact that he is shade to her means that he's kind of over her. They're in an embrace. Again, if you can see, what I'm doing here, one hand under her neck, the other hand around her, they are in a pretty intimate embrace here. So the question is, as the wooing continues, we see the couple in a sexual position that allows them to fondle each other. Interestingly, beloved offers a warning here. What is the warning and what does it mean? Verse 7. What's the warning and what does it mean?
Warning to not stir up or awaken love until it pleases. And what it means, I don't really know because I don't understand that.
All right. I'm glad you at least acknowledge that. Anybody want to give it a shot?
I would think it's probably a reference to consummation of like a marriage vow, like the actual act of intercourse.
The actual act of what?
Intercourse.
Okay, the actual act of intercourse. My teaching assistant has been looking at my notes, so she is correct.
I have not. I'm not even. Can't see them.
If we read Ecclesiastes 3 and verse 5, which Solomon also wrote, or Solomon wrote, he said there's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. So Josh, here's the warning, and we're going to read this warning 2 more times. The same one we see in verse 7 is going to be repeated 2 more times in this book. There need to be boundaries to protect the intimate relationship. It's not time for the consummation of their relationship. And so there's this warning. Don't arouse or awaken love until it's so desired. It's not time yet. It's not the appropriate circumstance. So boundaries, unfortunately, are often misinterpreted as limiting fun. But the reality is, boundaries allow you to immerse yourself in fun without inhibitions within the boundaries. Did that make sense? Let me say it a little more plainly. Within the boundaries of the marriage relationship, a couple should feel uninhibited in their sexual relationship. But it should be that sacred sexual relationship should be protected. There should be boundaries around that allow them to enjoy the uninhibited nature of their sexual relationship. If they don't have boundaries around it, it will injure the sacredness of their sexual relationship. So that's the warning that's being given here. There's a time for a couple to enjoy sexual intercourse, but there's a danger of getting too close to that. Don't arouse, don't stir up those kinds of feelings until you're within the boundaries that God has established, because it's those boundaries that enable you to enjoy it to the fullest. Does that make sense? Okay. So it's interesting that 3 times this warning comes up, and we'll talk about it again when we get to those times. All right. Song of Songs, chapter 2, verses 8 through 13. Somebody read those.
Listen, my beloved, look, here he comes, leaping across the mountains, bounding over the hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Look, there he stands behind our wall, gazing through the windows, peering through the lattice. My beloved spoke and said to me, arise, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me. See, the winter is past, the rains are over and gone, flowers appear on the earth, the season of singing has come. The cooing of doves is heard in our land. The fig tree forms its early fruit. The blossoming vines spread their fragrance. Arise, come, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me.
All right. Here again is escape language. All right. She is still living within the confines of Solomon's harem, but he wants her to come away with him. Now, what's interesting about this language is that, and now we're moving toward the question, you enter most any school during the spring of the year, and you will see how love buds as the cold gives way to warmer weather. Have you ever paid attention to that? You know, all of a sudden, the weather starts getting warm and romances start budding all over the place. It's an interesting phenomenon. So here, beloved describes lover leaping over mountains and hills. What is she saying in verses 8 through 13?
earlier, you described a wall as kind of the boundary for the sexual advances. And here she's saying, you know, he's trying to leap over the wall and trying to get past the mountains, and he's excited to see her and he's searching for her. It's almost as if, you know, the time has come or is coming.
Very, very good. The language is a building crescendo. It's the language of arousal, okay? So he is talking about the arousal that, or she is talking about the arousal that's being experienced here. So this is, as we'll see more clearly in following verses, this is about her inviting him to fully enjoy her body. Anything unholy about that? Not within the confines of God's constrictions. It's actually a beautiful and wonderful thing. Okay? So we see this intimate relationship continuing to build and move toward consummation as they are able to find time when she's not restricted by her obligations as part of Solomon's harem. Now, why would there be such shame associated with a God-given beautiful gift? Okay, because what we're reading doesn't seem to have any hint of shame or guilt or embarrassment about it. Why would there be shame associated?
Yeah, I would say, well, I mean, where the world is today, especially, well, really all over the place. But that's kind of where I get confused is because as I read through Song of Songs, it's kind of I like you said at the beginning, I don't feel like it should be in the Bible. It's a little intimate, too intimate for me, but I guess that's just kind of the way I've viewed it, not because of the way my parents raised me that way or because of really any outside influence. It's just kind of the way I've seen it is that the way that they're talking and the way that they're describing each other is pretty uncomfortable. So that's kind of my question. If you know, to leave here is, you know, is there anything clear cut? You know, you keep saying within the confines of God's intent. Is there anything that's clear cut with that, or are we going to find that out later?
Are you asking about what are the boundaries?
Yes.
Okay. I think that's a great question, and I think that's a question that even people who want to put their relationship within safe boundaries struggle with, because we are sexual beings and we have strong feelings and are aroused, men visually, women emotionally. And so where do you draw the line? I would begin, Josh, just by saying one of the first things that I think is important in defining this is to say that the relationship, and I've already said this, but I want to say it again, the relationship needs to be built on friendship. Too many relationships jump right into the physical. And that's not a good foundation for the relationship. So when there is friendship as the basis of the relationship, oftentimes that builds a level of respect that may not be there when a couple jumps right to the physical. You know, and it doesn't have to be that they're having sex. If they're making out kissing, and they've jumped right to that. That's not the place to be in a healthy, protective relationship. Okay. I will tell you that I know people who have not kissed until they married, or have had limited kisses or embraces. They've had embraces, but they've limited the physical part. I think, Josh, keeping yourself out of dark places late at night when you're tired and you're all alone is a boundary that needs to be put on. I think those are things that need to be talked about in the very early part of the relationship. Talk about protecting the relationship. Talk about what boundaries are going to be put around it in order to protect the heart. You know, we talked about that, I think, the first night, that when you jump to those, when you jump into what is reserved for marriage, you end up giving pieces of yourself sometimes to people who aren't going to be your marriage partner. And that's damaging to the heart. It can be damaging to the relationship. So I haven't done a very good job of giving you specific parameters, but I hope that I've touched on some things that may begin to answer that question. Okay. Some of you maybe who have, I've been married for 33 years now. Some of you who are more recent, do you have some suggestions here for Josh about how to draw boundaries?
I don't think we're the ones to comment. Nope.
Anybody got any?
This isn't really anything different, but Trent and I talked a lot about it, and talked about the desire that we had to wait until we were married to have sex, and we were very open about that with each other. And because we knew of each other's characters, that was something that was kind of a given, that we knew of each other because we love God and we know that's his design. But we did talk about it, and it is hard because of that attraction. And so we talked about it throughout, set boundaries. And as things came up, I think having revisiting the conversation is important too.
Very good. Thank you for giving that input and perspective. I tell Josh, premarital couples who are maybe only a couple of weeks from getting married, I remind them that the last few days and weeks leading up to the marriage, the temptation will get even stronger. So not to spend time alone together late at night after being fatigued, because if you don't set those boundaries early, if you find yourself in a vulnerable situation, there are going to be times that you go farther than you want to, and because at some point the flesh can take over, and so those protective boundaries have to be set way early instead of late in the game. Okay. And so to get real practical, any kind of petting or heavy making out, you're in a danger zone. Friendship, keeping the relationship on that friendship level and reserving the physical and sexual for marriage is going to be where the blessing is.
Dale, I know, I know this is something in counseling you've recommended, and also we've talked about it with our own kids. But once you this kind of the plus for short engagements. Some couples get engaged and they're going to get married in 2 years, and that just puts a lot of pressure on the relationship. So once you've made that decision that this is the person I want to marry, this is the person I want to spend the rest of my life with, really all you need from that point is just enough time to plan a wedding, and do your counseling, which really can be done fairly quickly. But this idea of getting engaged and there's really no prospect even in sight of a wedding date is really just kind of pointless.
So the point of that is long building of friendships, short engagements. Okay?
Yeah.
Because when you're ready to take that step, go ahead.
For it.
Engagement should be that serious. It was in Jesus' day. It was essentially being married. You had to go through a divorce process to be engaged, to break an engagement in Jesus' day. That's what we see with Mary and Joseph. So I hope that's helpful to you, Josh. Good. Wow, 8:02. That went fast. So I appreciate your input tonight, and hope that it has blessed your relationship and your understanding of God's beautiful intimacy and of the heart of God, because we saw God being someone who believes in having an intimate relationship with his people. And that should encourage us, and we're going to talk about that more as we go through the study. So have a blessed week and a blessed night. I hope you rest well. Good night.